Hello, today I'd like to present to you the literature of the American Enlightenment and using as an example the poems on various subjects by Phillis Wheatley. The American Enlightenment was a period of intellectual burst in 13 American colonies from the late 17th century to the early 18th century. It was inspired by the ideas of European influencers such as John Locke, Thomas Hobbes, Voltaire, Baron Montesquieu, Immanuel Kant, Adam Smith, and others. At least 6 ideas came to punctuate American Enlightenment thinking: deism, liberalism, republicanism, conservatism, toleration, and scientific progress. Based on the metaphor of bringing light to the dark age, people changed their viewpoint on various things such as human nature, religion, and politics. The scientific revolution transformed the way people looked at problems, not only in the realm of science, but also in the general realm of public affairs. The principles behind the Age of Reason were in the application of human intellect. American Enlightenment is generally discussed in terms of the America's political evolution, which led to the revolution against Great Britain and the creation of modern republic. The Declaration of Independence was the most important document of the age. Literary works were meant to persuade and inform the common man of a specific viewpoint or ideology. Therefore, literature came in short form such as pamphlets, essays, pieces of poetry, and speeches. In addition, the agrarian, the revolutionary, and intellectual aspects of this time period impacted literary elements. The tone of many works was bland and lacking emotion. Many literary works served as arguments or explanations. Therefore, plots and characters were largely absent. In the American context, thinkers such as Thomas Paine, James Madison, Thomas Jefferson, John Adams, and Benjamin Franklin invented and adopted revolutionary ideas about scientific rationality, religious toleration, and experimental political organization, ideas that would have far-reaching effects on the development of the fledgling nation. Slavery was practiced throughout America during the 17th-18th century. African slaves helped to build the new nation into the economic powerhouse as cheap and plentiful labor source. Slavery started in 1619 when 20 African slaves were brought to the shores of British colony of Jamestown, Virginia. I've chosen the poems on various subjects, religious and moral, by Phillis Wheatley as an example of the literature of the American Enlightenment. It is the first book of poetry written by the African American female author. This fact itself makes the book significant, but Phillis Wheatley's poems have a complicated and fascinating history of its own. Born around 1754, the future poet was kidnapped from Africa and transported to Boston aboard the slave ship Phillis in 1761. John Wheatley, a prosperous Boston merchant, purchased a little girl as an companion for his wife, Suzanne. Willis showed the aptitude for learning. There is a note in the poems showing the early years of the author and some moments of her education. Phillis Wheatley became a published author at the age of 13 with her poem on Mrs. Hussey and Coffin. Colonial printing in general was a rather small enterprise as compared to the large and established printing industry in London. In 1772, the Countess of Huntingdon in London agreed to finance the publishing of Wheatley's poems. The Wheatleys even had to attest to the veracity of the Phillis authorship by recruiting 18 most prominent New England religious and political leaders to sign a special document. Phillis herself was well aware that her volume of poetry was not just a mere reflection of her writing abilities. It has set the basis for the debate whether slavery could exist in the civilized society. It had turned many opinions against the institution of slavery. Phillis had to visit England. She wrote the farewell to America, where she reflected the regret to leave Susan, who was quite ill at the moment, but she also was eagerly anticipating to visit the intellectual and cultural center of Britain. The historical context is important in understanding of Wheatley's poetry. In the 18th century, the highest form of artistic expression was poetry in the classical mode and formal language. 'Twas mercy brought me from my pagan land, showed my benighted soul to understand that there is a God, that there is a Saviour too, once a redemption, neither fought nor knew. Some see our sable race as with scornful eye, their colour is a diabolic dye. Remember, Christians, Negroes, black as Cain, may be refined and join the angelic train. Most of Phillis Wheatley's poetry cannot be understood outside of its religious context. For the poet, an act of profound evil, her kidnapping from Africa, was used by God for a good end, her introduction to Christianity. Although some proponents of slavery in the 19th century understood this as an approval of the slave system. Phillis Wheatley's poems contain many references to her lowly status, but in fact she has little hesitation in addressing such grand figures as King George or General Washington. In one poem she offers advice to the graduating class of Harvard. Phillis Wheatley died in December of 1784. She wanted to publish another volume of poetry, but the manuscript was never found. Now she remains as one of the most remarkable authors of the Enlightenment period in America.